Hello, I'm Danny Nazat, and I'm standing here at the lower trailhead of the Blackberry Meadow located inside Cove Spring Park in Frankfort, Kentucky. Please join me as I tell the story of Brian Baker, the volunteer who single-handedly transformed an abandoned dump site into a beautiful park meadow.
About 7 years ago, I saw a notice that there was going to be a meeting of a group called Walk, Bike, Frankfort. I didn't really know anything about it, but I decided I'd go check it out. And when I went there, they had already, this was the first meeting, but they had already done some preliminary work, and they had identified about 72 units throughout the city where they thought there was potential to add or enhance hiking, trails, or connectivity. And so they said they wanted a volunteer for each area. And I had already been coming to Cove Spring, and I knew about this area, and I knew that it was not part of the park, but I knew that it was very close to the park, right on the edge, and that it had great potential to be connecting to Indian Hills neighborhood and to this Ridgeview neighborhood. And so right off, I volunteered to do an investigation of this area. And I came in through here. It was very rugged and overgrown. And I made, at the end of that work, I made a proposal to the city, well, to Walk, Bike, Frankfort, which then got to the city of Frankfort, that they purchased this property and that we would make a trail so that people could walk in from these neighborhoods. And so shortly after, the city bought it. So this is the latest. This area up here is the newest part of Cove Spring Park. So when I stacked this asphalt here, I was doing two things. One, I was making a retaining wall so that I could level this up so I could mow it. But I would intentionally leave spaces when I laid these down, and I would leave like little entranceways. And then if you go back into this, they actually open up into little galleries. Sometimes they're like 8 inches across. I'd find a big flat rock and I'd put on top of it. So it goes back into like little rooms. There's a whole network of them at multiple layers here. I'm doing two things. One, I'm trying to create habitat, but I'm also trying to make it difficult for these people that come into the park and they try to collect various animals, snakes. I'm not sure what they're doing with them, but we don't appreciate that. And I'm doing everything I can to make it more difficult for them to come in here and bother our native animals. We're here at Blackberry Meadow, and we're at the far end of what is known as the Spring Spur. And most people that have come to the park over the years pick up a trail down in the valley and they walk back this gorge here. And at that point, you're about 150 feet below this point here. This area was not part of the park until about 7 years ago, so a lot of people are not only not familiar with this, but even people who've come up and checked out this area are not familiar with this feature right here. And basically, you have a natural channel here that was carved through the limestone by runoff. Over in this direction here is a neighborhood called Indian Hills. It's one of the largest neighborhoods in Frankfort. And it's a series of sinkholes. And so almost all the water, rainwater and snow that falls in Indian Hills goes down into sinkholes and comes out down at the bottom of this gorge in various springs. When I first started working here, I made a trail that came up from Shinkle Lane, and I cut down through here with the brush cutter, and I found a structure here. It was very small, it had a tin roof, and it had started to collapse in, and I thought it was a chicken coop. So this was about 7 years ago. And so anyway, I kept working, and I finally got the trail to where it was pretty good to walk on because it was very rough. And I was coming here one day to work, and I saw an older lady with a younger lady walking up, and I knew as soon as I saw them what was going on. I said, I bet she lived here. So I started talking to her, and she told me that this was a 3-room house that she lived in, and that every day they had to walk down this old road, go down to the spring to get water. She was probably in her late 70s, maybe 80s, and this was 7 years ago. And she said that the person who owned this owned all of that land that now is Indian Hills, and it was a farm, and they rented from him. So anyway, I wanted to try to preserve this. But before I actually started, this was when I was a volunteer, and before I started working here, they had a cleanup day, and they came in and they took this thing apart because they wanted to get the tin roof off of it. You know, I would have tried to save it. So since then, I've been trying to save anything that I can find that I think is related to the house. Like these poles right here. There's some poles leaning up against the tree. And then I've got a little pile right here. Anytime that I find something that I think maybe is from the house, from the home, I try to set it here. My guess is that this was built in the early 1900s. So, but as you can see, there's some there's guttering, and there's some electrical type things. This is an old commode. So somehow or another, they had water and electricity at some point,